Welcome to Healing Minds, Stories of Resiliency and Recovery, a conversation held at the intersection of substance abuse, mental health, and everyday living. Your hosts, Mark Regala and Justin Wolf, bring both professional expertise and personal understanding to the table. So welcome to the conversation. Let's dive in.
Welcome back to another episode of Healing Minds, Stories of Resiliency and Recovery. I'm your host, Justin Wolf, joined as always by my co-host, Mark Regala. Mark, how are you doing today?
Doing good. How about you? I'm enjoying that button-up that's on. You look so sharp today.
Hey, just hearing that from you has made this already worth it. So I'm stressed to impress you. That's it. So I can check my box for the day. I'm good.
Yeah. You don't have to impress me, man. A hat and a t-shirt is all you need to wear for me. You know that.
I know. It's got to be a medium, though. I understand that as well. So.
Oh, now we're squeezing into a small.
Yeah, get it right. Get it tight for summer. Look at you, Mark.
But in all seriousness, it's hard to believe we're in the middle of August. Kids, if they haven't started going back to school, are going to be starting to go back to school in the next week in the burbs, city a little bit longer. Got Labor Day around the corner. Kind of crazy how fast this year is going, Justin.
It is. It's wild. It's just kind of like in the blink of an eye, it's already done. Believe my kids already at home, like, oh my God, I can't believe this is already time to go back to school. It's not what they'd like to do. And I think for a lot of parents, just like, you know what? It's good for them to get that structure back into their lives. You know? We've had a lot of family time. I think they can use some more, friend time and learning experiences. It'll be great.
I get it. I do.
Or maybe that's just me projecting my own thoughts on everybody else, saying that we're all in the same boat, just to normalize it. That's always part of it too. But we got an interesting topic. I think this is a topic that you and I discussed and talked about, because I think we're hearing a lot more about it, especially in the groups that we host. And it's just been a very buzzworthy topic when we bring up the idea of cannabis and talk a lot about a substance that gets a lot of promotion. And there's a lot of publicity and marketing that has gone into kind of promoting cannabis in a certain light, while also not taking into account all the facts and the details of what does the science say. Very much, similar to you talk about like big tobacco and what the tobacco and the smoking industry did, along with like the alcohol industry in terms of what they promote and what's the image we want to kind of create around this substance that's going to draw consumers in. Because ultimately, at the end of the day, what are they trying to do? They're trying to capture customers. Mm-hmm. And so I think when we talk about cannabis as a whole, there's two very different components to it that we kind of need to first kind of put out there. And that's really differentiating between CBD, which gets a lot of headway, which will kind of say, hey, this is what has been used and shown in the research to treat medical conditions, seizures, epilepsy. This is the part of the plant that does not get you high. Versus THC, which is the psychoactive component of marijuana that creates the high, that creates the euphoria, that is really, when you look at the concentrates and the dabs and the pens and the plants, like that is the component of that has just drastically shifted throughout the years, really in a sense making it a completely different plant than it has been historically. So just for reference point, 90s, early 2000, you looked at like THC content in marijuana, about 3 to 6% THC. Now you're looking at a plant that on average is around 18 to like 20% THC. And that's in the plant form itself. So you're looking at very different substances. I like to kind of compare this to somebody who's been drinking, Bacardi, and then flipping it to kind of like Bacardi 151 and saying it's like the same drink, when we know it's a very different alcohol that's being consumed. And so that's the part where these two have kind of been intermixed into each other. You look at THC, that content has gone up dramatically. And what ends up happening is that naturally, when you're increasing the psychoactive component of a plant, you're going to impact the brain in a very different manner than it historically has been impacted. And so CBD, right? That's the part, like the research, when you kind of go and you look at like, hey, what has this been shown to help with? what has the science said? When it comes to epilepsy, the evidence is there. Like, hey, this is something that can kind of help with epilepsy. And when you look at a lot of the other claims that have kind of come out saying that marijuana, when I used to go around and do presentations, there was like a laundry list of like, medical conditions that claims were being made that marijuana was effective for and would be used to kind of treat. But the evidence doesn't support that. And the science doesn't support that. There's a lot of mixed results. So you can't come out and say for certainty that it's going to help with anxiety. It's going to help with depression. It's, going to alleviate the mental health pain that, a lot of times it exacerbates and perpetuates. Because what you tend to get with people from a lot of the individuals that I've worked with and have known personally is the idea that what begins the use is a lot of times different than what kind of continues and perpetuates the use. Meaning that, hey, I'm not in a good spot. I'm not feeling good. I smoke to try and feel better. Eventually turns into and transitions into a lot of people saying, hey, I'm just smoking to try and feel normal now.
Yeah. Well, that sounds like any other form of addiction.
Right?
I mean, seriously, think about it. I mean, alcohol. You wake up with the DTs in the morning, and you start drinking right away. What are you drinking for? You're drinking just to feel normal. Look at
Right.
heroin or opiate pain pills. Okay, you're waking up, you're feeling like crap. You're going through maybe a mild form of withdrawals or severe withdrawals. Now if you're a heroin user, you use. If you're an opiate pain pill user, you pop a few pills or whatever it might be, and now you're just trying to feel normal.
Right.
You're not even chasing a high at that point. You just don't want to be sick.
Right. And it's become so ingrained into the lifestyle that it almost becomes like part of the individual's identity. That it's like, hey, if I don't have this, my anxiety is going to spike. I am now going to feel out of control if I don't have this or if I run out.
Again, sounds addicted to any other major drug.
Right. And I think that's the part where it's like you look at a lot of the behaviors that I personally have witnessed individuals engage in to obtain, to use, to cover up, to like scrape together some money. Whether it's taking like parents' stuff to the pawn shop, selling really nice Christmas gifts, going to the mall and returning items, stealing items, and from a lot of and I'll tell you, like a lot of the individuals I would work with and have worked with, you hear a lot of the points about, hey, where does this start? Where does this begin? And I'll tell you about 90% of the individuals that came through a program that I used to work predominantly in that was an adolescent dual diagnosis substance use and mental health condition treatment program. 90% of those individuals coming through that program had, they had been diagnosed with anxiety or depression. They had school challenges and problems. They had problems within their family system, peer issues, and they were also smoking cannabis. And so you kind of look at, and it brings up the idea of, self-medication because of all the pain, because of all the stress. Am I using it as a result of everything that's occurring in my life? Or, it's or and, right? Like, and am I using this and it's also feeding and contributing to the very problems that I'm facing and having to manage on a day in and day out basis?
And it's what you're describing is any other form of addiction. You become
Right.
mentally addicted, um, psychologically addicted, and then physically addicted. I know we're going to get into that in a little bit. Because I want to talk to you about that. About the people going through withdrawals and things like that, coming off of these high THC level.
Right. Right. And I think it's just
More
like
and more.
any other. What's that?
You're seeing more and more of that right now, where people are going to rehab facilities. Like there's one person in particular, a lady reached out to me about her husband, and she was telling me that he's abusing drugs, he's abusing marijuana, that he's not buying at a dispensary. And she started describing the symptoms to me about what he was going through. And I told her, I said, he's got to be doing something else. I mean, there's got to be something else going on there because to me, what she was describing was like heroin or opiate withdrawals. And she swore up and down, she goes, "No, Mark, all he does, I know this, all he does is marijuana, all he does is marijuana." And that's, if you remember, that's when I reached out to you. You're working at that at the recovery center. I said, "Hey, are you having patients come in there? Are you having clients come in there that are addicted to just marijuana, that are having withdrawal symptoms similar to like opiate withdrawals?" And that's when you kind of shed some light on that situation. I said, "Absolutely, we are." And that really opened up my eyes, big time. And
Yeah.
that was a couple of years ago, maybe about 18 months ago, maybe 24 months ago. And then we were in our support groups, we're seeing more and more of people abusing THC. And, we're seeing a lot of these symptoms that you're talking about: anxiety, you know, physical dependence, mental or psychological dependence or what have you. So I mean, it's definitely something that's growing since it became legal here in Illinois. Hey, just like with alcohol, just because it's legal doesn't mean it's right to do, and doesn't
Right.
mean it's good for you. People
Absolutely.
understand.
Absolutely. Because I think a lot of times when we hear the word it's legal, it kind of gets equated with safe. So if it's legal, it's okay, right? And I think that's the component that kind of gets missed sometimes. Like just because it's legal doesn't necessarily mean that this is a safe substance or that it was, legalized with the community's best interest in mind at all.
Yeah, I'm about to say, I don't think that they had mine or your interest in mind when they legalized it. They were after the almighty dollar tax revenue.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And I think what ended up happening, and I think you kind of referenced it, like when we talk about, when it got legalized, like what was going on in in our society and our culture at that time, and what was happening is that once marijuana was legalized, I know we saw quite a few people like return to use and lapse because of that message of what was being communicated out there. And the brain can kind of hook onto that idea. It's like, well, legal means safe. And so if it's safe, then I guess I'm not doing anything wrong. It's a legal substance. It's not like I'm doing X, Y, or Z anymore.
Yeah.
And just like any of those other substances, like, hey, you can have a problem with any substance out there and it can impact and deteriorate your life. And those things are important to you when it grabs a hold of your mind. And so you saw a lot of people have some significant like recovery time under the belt kind of lose it around that spot. And you saw people who were entertaining the idea of sobriety at that time kind of put a hold on it. And I think that's what's continued to happen is that you kind of get this like mental yo-yo going back and forth, like, hey, depending upon who I want to hear, what I want to listen to in the moment, it's going to sway and influence the decision I make in
Yeah.
terms of what direction I'm going to go with this.
There were some other influences too, because we became legal in Illinois January 1st, 2020, and then we know what happened. 3.5 months later, which was the lockdowns for COVID and all
Yeah.
this. And it was almost like the perfect storm because they kept the dispensaries open,
Yeah.
but they shut down all the support groups. They shut down all the AA meetings and so forth. And people were sober off of alcohol, but they thought, well, maybe I will try this because now it's legal. And that, they got that addictive component. They got that addictive gene in their brain, and that led them right down to relapsing on the alcohol, things like that. And when things reopened after COVID and the AA halls opened up again to live meetings, not virtual meetings, I mean, it was a complete pendulum shift. I mean, it was a complete change from the demographics to how many people were showing up in the meeting. I mean, it was shocking actually to see.
Yeah. No, and I think
Ever
that,
since,
what's that?
and it's been growing ever since.
Absolutely. Because I think there's a big challenge coming because to the brain, a drug is a drug is a drug. And it's going to light up that reward part of the brain. And it's going to say, hey, I like this. Get me more of it. And it's going to drive that behavior that's solely focused on seeking it out, obtaining and using it. And so it becomes very goal directed, which becomes, when we talk about how, it lights up that part of the brain, well, over time, just like any other substance, that reward pathway gets shifted. And now the things in life that used to make people feel good, those activities that they found meaning or purpose in, they kind of get dulled down. And that's what you kind of hear when we talk about cannabis and the way it impacts individuals' lives, is that it becomes very insidious. And I was running a family session one time, and a father described it as that to his daughter. And I just remember thinking that was very profound, the way that in which you word it. Because he's like, look, it's not like one of these other substances that grabs you immediately. Like you talk about meth, cocaine, heroin, opiates, fentanyl. He's like, it's not like you're going to see these pronounced horrific effects in your life right away. Cannabis is one of those drugs that kind of gets in there and gets its hands into you and slowly starts peeling away those things from you that you might have used to define who you are as a person, those things that kind of you found meaning and purpose in and you felt a connection with. It just slowly pulls you away from all that, leading to the only thing that at the end of the day that you're thinking about that's going to make you feel good or that you want is the drug itself. And you become caught up in this very, in a sense, very toxic relationship with the substance where it's cost you those things that you had a passion and a drive to connect and follow through with.
Yeah. No, there's no doubt. And then, the other component too is, and I realize it's the reward center in the brain, excuse me, and how it affects the brain chemistry. But then, like what's your overall feeling without it? You feel lazy, you feel tired, you feel lethargic. There's no body movement whatsoever. You're
Yeah.
on the friggin' couch watching Netflix or watching sporting events, raiding the pantry or raiding the fridge with the munchies, not necessarily putting the healthiest foods in the body. And not only is your brain chemistry being affected by the mind altering substance that you're putting in, but now your body becomes inactive, which is going to affect the brain chemistry. And you're typically going to put some not so healthy foods in your body, which is going to affect the brain chemistry as well, which can lead you to a huge, huge situation from a depressive state.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Because I think what you hear a lot of times, man, like I've been there. I think a lot of other people have kind of been there where you kind of feel like you're just existing in the world. You're
Yeah.
just going through the motions. You're not living your life. You're just kind of there. And you're talking about like feeding and increasing and intensifying those depressive symptoms. I mean, the research was out there a long time ago. Like NIDA did some great research and they kind of said, and they came back and like, look, this is the way cannabis impacts and affects people's brains, mood, and overall functioning. You talk about people who have a lower life satisfaction with everything that they're kind of moving towards or not moving toward. You look at intensified symptoms of anxiety, depression, and lower life satisfaction and achievement. You also get the increased frequency of suicidal ideation and thoughts. And I think that's a lot of times where it comes to, and it gets to the point of just saying, hey, if I don't wake up, whatever, I'm good. And you get people having that very universal and common experience when cannabis is being used on a very regular basis, and you're also struggling with depression, or anxiety, and it's intensifying those symptoms.
Yeah, it's and I do want you to elaborate a little bit because we've seen this with our support group, and I don't know if there's a direct correlation or not, but I've been doing some reading online and so forth. So we talked a little bit beforehand, and you mentioned it early in the podcast about these THC levels. Okay, I mean it's at a whole nother level, compared to what it once was, and the potency of this of what they're putting into their body is just so much stronger. And like you said, it's leading to anxiety, but it's leading to a paranoia state. It's leading to psychosis. And, what I've seen, okay, is that there seems to be a lot more young adults
Yeah.
that are coming in with like diagnosis of like schizoaffective disorder. But then when you start talking to them, okay, and they talk about how much weed or how much THC they're using and how much they're abusing, and then you see the effects of them maybe easing back on their usage or eventually getting sober on their usage, getting sober, excuse me, how that affects the brain, and maybe that was like a misdiagnosis. Like they really can't truly even diagnose whether somebody's got schizoaffective because you're hearing thoughts or you're hearing voices in your head from the potency of the actual drug.
Absolutely. I think that's been a big flip that we've seen, like that marijuana-induced psychosis. That has definitely increased and intensified. And you get just the way it's changing the brain, right? The way it's impacting it and disrupting the normal process in which it operates. So I like to kind of describe it as this, because you see like individuals who use cannabis on a regular basis, you tend to see a slower processing speed or a delayed response at times, where not as quick as they once were. It's almost like taking a giant wrecking ball to like 88 or 355, and this is like the pathway of your brain, and you're just taking it and just crushing these highway systems out of your brain. So now the normal way in which information is communicated, like and retrieved from our mind, like it's got to find a new pathway. It's got to find a new way to recall, retrieve, and then put forth that information. And so that's what ends up happening over time, is that we have to utilize or embrace like different neural pathways in our brain, because this substance is changing the way in which our brain is operating. And that's where, I mean, you talk about anything that changes with the brain, there's a lot of unpredictability in terms of what's going to happen and what's going to occur. You talk about, I mean, psychosis, hallucinating, paranoia, believing that, there's cameras being put in the house and that you're constantly under surveillance. I've had individuals believe that, right? And you'd hear that, you're like, well, that sounds like something that's more present with individuals who have schizophrenia. Well, with this potency of this substance and the way it's impacting the brain, can it trigger a psychotic episode? Yes, it can. And you also look at just people's overall physical health from this substance. We talk about cannabinoid hyperemesis syndrome. And I don't feel like we'd be doing a service if we didn't mention that, but that is something that causes significant distress and physical anguish to individuals that experience that. And that's cyclical vomiting, like uncontrollable vomiting triggered directly by their cannabis use. And I've worked with multiple individuals who have experienced this, and the way they describe it just sounds like just pure torture, to the point that they're losing significant body weight, 10, 15, 20 pounds, needing to be hospitalized. You kind of get IV fluids because they're dehydrated. And unfortunately, a lot of times the only treatment modality or recommendation is like, hey, warm showers seem to help with this.
I'd never heard of that before, to be honest with you.
Yeah.
So, I mean, you just taught me something there. I did not know that can happen.
And so like the brain does this crazy thing where it's kind of like, it wants to kind of say it's everything else except this. It can't be caused by weed. I probably just had like some awful flu or food poisoning or my anxiety. I just had a full-blown panic attack, and that's why I was throwing up. But that's not the case. I mean, I had a young man I worked with, and that was his primary concern, is the fact he's like, hey, I've been sober. I've been able to sustain my sobriety. He has a slip, and you can tell right away, because all of a sudden he falls right back into having another episode of cannabinoid hyperemesis, and he's vomiting. He can't keep it down. He's calling. He's like, oh my gosh. And he knows that in those moments, that if he returns to use, that's exactly what's going to happen the next time.
That's what I was asking. Sorry to interrupt. So it's during use, so it's not like a withdrawal or anything like that. This is something completely different.
Yeah.
Okay.
And so that is why, with the higher potency THC, something that has kind of come onto the scene and been much more prevalent that individuals have had to experience. And I think that's the part when we talk about, is marijuana addictive? Like for years, this has been the big debate. Well, it's mentally addictive, but is it physically addictive? And trying to really kind of disseminate between the two to kind of say one's not as bad as the other is really kind of what that battle comes against. Or you talk about marijuana, well, it's not as bad as, and then you're never really having a conversation strictly about that substance. It's always in comparison to something else. It's not like I'm shooting this, snorting that, or popping that. You know what I mean? Like I'm just smoking weed or doing this now. And I think that's when those defenses kind of get triggered. It's like, hey, let's just kind of look at how this substance and what behaviors is drawing out from you, how this really looks in your life. And you look at the behaviors that people go through, the desire to try and make it fit when all the messages they receive from society and the people in their lives are saying this is not working. This is causing you a lot of pain. You're losing like your sense of self. It's almost like, and you hear this often, especially when you work with families like adolescents and young adults. It's almost like my child was hijacked, and they replaced it with a clone that looks like them, but doesn't talk like them, doesn't act like them, doesn't really move around too much. It's like I want to kind of get, and it's like almost like somebody turned the lights off, and they don't have that kind of flicker there. And it's like I want to bring my child back. I want to bring my loved one back. Yeah, go ahead, Mark.
No, I mean it's a great analogy, but I mean honestly, again, you're talking about full blown addiction. I mean, your brain is hijacked. And I would hear stories all the time. No matter what the drug is or what the substance is, you know, I, I just he's a different person, or she's a different person. I would say, the person that you love is still in there. You know, it's just that they're acting differently because of all the harm they've done to their body and because the brain being rewired. But the person is still in there. The person that you love is still in there. But it's very hard from a family perspective to go through that. I look at it from my perspective, like with my parents with me, or my sister with me. And yeah, I mean, that was a different form of addiction. But, from doing the work in the community, you hear this all the time from friends of the addict, family members of the addict, significant others of the addict. They all say the same thing. It's very, very consistent, no matter what the drug choice is.
Right. And I think a lot of times when you hear this too, it's like, yeah, of course, you're struggling with anxiety, you're struggling with depression at the same time that this is present in your life. And in order to kind of move forward and move past that and to learn to manage that and feel like you're empowered to do so, you have to let go of marijuana and see that you have the ability within yourself and not have to look externally for something to solve it, to get rid of it, to extinguish it, to say, hey, I have a different way of relating and experiencing these thoughts and these emotions and these feelings when they arise, and I can work through this. And that goes a long way when we talk about building a different path in different movement forward without saying, I need marijuana in my life to manage the emotional distress I experience and to get me through the day. Because that is, again, like you're saying, hey, it's no different than any other addiction, any other substance, any other rationale. It's kind of saying at the end of the day, I need to look in the mirror and say, like, hey, the person that I need is there. And I got to kind of like tune into like those strengths that I got to kind of help persevere and push through this while learning to manage it. Because whether I want to say this is addictive or not, because a lot of times that turns into a tug of war battle that's going on. It's like, yes, it is. No, it's not. Yes, it is. No, it's not. At the end of the day, it's like saying, hey, is this helping me? Is this really helping create a life that I really want to be living? Or is this really, am I just continuing to pay a cost to really try and fit this into my life when all the evidence says that this is not working for me? And so I just think like with what you and I have been hearing, Mark, like I just thought this was something we could kind of dive a little bit more into because it makes sense. No one wants to feel bad. No one likes to feel pain. Nobody likes to feel hurt. And you naturally, as people, want to get rid of that. And it's seeing that, hey, I might have a little bit more strength and skill set here than I might be giving myself credit for in these times. And I need to really tune in and tap into that.
This was your idea, this podcast, and I can tell why, because you're speaking very passionately about it, and I know why you're speaking very passionately about it because you're seeing this stuff all day with your therapy sessions, I'm sure.
Just a little bit, Mark. Just a little bit.
Yeah.
But no, I think it's important because sometimes like you get so low and you feel so bad about yourself that you start to fill your head with all these thoughts and all these beliefs and ideas about the person that you are is somebody who can't manage life.
Yeah.
Or I can't handle this, right? These stories that we tell ourselves that become absolute truths. And it's like, no, there's another way here. And sometimes our solution to the problem is a problem itself. We got to see that there's another way to navigate it.
I got one more quick question for you. Okay. So these reports are coming out about the millennials. Okay.
I'm one of them. You know that, right?
They look just like one.
I'm like one of the older ones. I'm like, I'm not a millennial. And I'm like, crap, I am.
well, maybe it's whatever the most current generation,
Yeah.
current 21. Okay, but you're hearing that this generation is drinking less than any generation prior to them. Okay, and that's why they're coming out with the 0% micro brews and 0% alcohol and 0% wine.
Absolutely.
But then you also hear the other end of the spectrum. I don't know if the data supports. I want to hear a professional opinion. The reason why so many of these younger individuals are not drinking is because they're relying on other stuff because weed's legal and it wasn't legal back in the day. So is alcohol being replaced by this with the younger generation, and is this becoming like kind of like an epidemic that you're seeing with the younger generation?
I think it's been much more accessible to younger generations. And when you see things get legalized, like marijuana got legalized and accessibility increases and you have stores carrying it, well, then of course, use is going to go up among the youth. And when you hear and you see things presented in a manner that's very much like it helps, it fixes, it solves, no problems. Like, no, it doesn't do any of that stuff. Well, then of course, like marketing is very powerful.
Yeah,
And
yeah,
so it can kind of drive that behavior. And you're also seeing, too, on the flip side, a big health conscious awareness rising within this generation in the sense of, I need to take care of my body. We're setting up sober bars. We're setting up, different supports in the communities in place that can help people see, like, hey, living a life of sobriety is not boring and dull. It doesn't mean you're lame. You're just experiencing and living life on life's terms. And that can be just fine.
nothing wrong with that. I always thought maybe because you do have some of those stats, and to me, when I talk to somebody in their 20s, it's like feast or famine. They either abstain or they're rather aggressive with the alcohol and other substances. There doesn't seem to be a lot of in between. That's just what I see. We're doing the different presentations that I do and so forth. And I always say the people that abstain, they've probably just seen too much at a young age. Maybe they lost one of their friends to an overdose already. Maybe they see a couple of their friends going downhill on the slide really quick, and they don't want anything to do with it. Or maybe it has to do with the parents in the household and what they witnessed with the parents.
Right. And you're hearing that too, where it's like there's been, numerous articles put out there about children rushed to the ER. I mean, the ER visits have jumped up dramatically from children eating edibles that they thought was just candy or regular food. And it's like all of a sudden now they're in the ER and this poor child has no idea what's happening and what they're experiencing as a result of getting their hands on something that mom or dad left lying around. And so, I mean, you look at like what's a powerful, like you look at the message, like as kids, you'll learn at a young age, hey,
Yeah,
what's okay? I don't want my kid to drink, but it's okay for me to drink in front of them pretty heavily and on a daily basis, but it's not okay for them. My behavior sends a very loud message.
absolutely.
And so what I'm doing, like, hey, how do I show them I handle a bad day? How do I show them that I celebrate like a victory? How do I show them I just like what I do all day, every day? They're watching and they're taking note and they're going to think that I am a total, what's like not hypercritical, but, just I'm not a person of my word if I'm saying it's okay for me, but not okay for you. That word's escaping me right now, what that is. Um, so I think that's the part.
Hypocritical.
It is okay. Yeah, I guess I was right. Um, where where do kids get some of their stuff? They found their parents' stash. You hear that all the time.
Oh, you hear it on the news.
Yeah.
Has carted 4 or 5 students away from a fourth grade elementary school class because one of the kids passed out what they thought was candy and ended up being edibles.
I mean, local high school around here had that years ago, where it's all of a sudden, 5 kids will be taken to the ER. Wonder why? Everybody got their hands on something that appeared to be just a harmless brownie.
Yeah, yeah.
But I mean, there's horror stories galore that can kind of just get like put out there, and I think the part is that hey, like this isn't a harmless substance, right? This isn't something that's going around and very present and much more intertwined within our culture today. That doesn't come without cost or doesn't come without risk to people's emotional and physical well-being.
It was a good discussion.
Yeah,
Okay.
so appreciate the talk, Mark, and appreciate you joining in and sharing your insights and your views on this and allowing me to kind of talk, man. So thank you.
It was good. was very good. I'm glad you brought the topic up, like I said. So
awesome. Well, anything else, Mark, before we kind of call it a day?
no, next podcast will be heading into Labor Day already, which is kind of crazy.
I know. It's wild. Wow. So thank you, everybody, for tuning into these podcasts. We appreciate you listening today, and hopefully this was helpful and informational, educational there. So as always, feel free to reach out if there's any questions, any comments, feedback, or topics you'd like to hear us kind of dive into. These podcasts air on the 1st and the 15th of the month, so feel free to tune in then. And until next time, wish everybody a great day, morning, evening, wherever you are listening to this podcast, and we will catch you on the next episode.
Thanks for joining us today on Healing Minds, Stories of Resiliency and Recovery. If you're on the journey to find guidance and insights, subscribe now wherever you find your podcasts. Healing Minds, Stories of Resiliency and Recovery is an educational resource, not a substitute for medical or therapeutic advice. The opinions expressed by the hosts and their guests are not necessarily those of NAMI DuPage. Go to namidupage.org/podcast for links to past episodes, show notes, and to submit a question or topic ideas for a future episode. Until next time, be well.